Welcome back, horror fans, to another night of shadows and spine-chilling whispers. Tonight, I have a story that will make you question the comfort of your own home, a tale of loneliness, obsession, and a restless spirit desperate to be heard. Imagine moving into an old, quiet apartment, hoping for a fresh start, only to find yourself haunted by whispers in the night, footsteps outside your door, and visions that leave you questioning what's real. In tonight's story, The Midnight Murmurs, you'll meet Emma, a young woman who learns the hard way that sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. So turn off your lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for a tale that will linger in your mind long after the video ends. But beware, you might not be alone. The Midnight Murmurs. Chapter 1. The Call from Nowhere. It was a chilly November night when Emma first heard the call. She was alone in her apartment, nestled in the heart of a sprawling, gloomy city. It had been raining for days and the windows dripped with trails of water that distorted the lights from the street below. Emma was used to the city sounds, honking horns, faint music from nearby apartments, and the occasional shout in the distance. But this was something else. It was a whisper. Soft, almost gentle at first, but unmistakable. She heard it as she lay in bed, just on the edge of sleep. The words were unintelligible, but there was a distinct urgency to them, a subtle beckoning that sent a chill racing down her spine. She sat up, her heart pounding as she strained to listen, convinced she was imagining it. Yet, the voice persisted, growing louder and more insistent until it seemed to fill her room. Emma! Her name! She was sure of it now. The whisper was everywhere, echoing from the walls, seeping out of the shadows, curling up from the floorboards. She felt a heavy, oppressive presence surround her, as if unseen eyes were watching from every corner. She clamped her hands over her ears, desperately hoping to block out the voice, but it only grew louder, resonating through her entire body. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Emma sat frozen in the darkness, her heart racing, unsure if she'd dreamed the whole thing. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Past. The next day, Emma tried to brush it off. She went about her usual routine, trying to laugh it off as a half-waking nightmare. But that night, as the rain pattered against her window and the city's sounds faded, it began again. Emma? The whisper was clearer now, the voice almost familiar, but distorted, as if it were coming from a broken radio. She tried to ignore it, but it was relentless, pressing against her mind like a vice. She barely slept, haunted by the voice that wouldn't let her go. Desperate for answers, she began researching the history of her apartment. She spent hours digging through online archives and city records. To her horror, she discovered that her building had once been the site of a psychiatric hospital in the 1950s, infamous for its mistreatment of patients. Reports told of horrendous conditions, of patients being chained in dark, cramped rooms, left to waste away in the shadows. One patient's story, in particular, stood out. A woman named Lydia Gray, who had been committed for hearing voices. She'd been kept in isolation, her pleas for help ignored until finally she'd vanished without a trace. Some claimed she'd escaped, but others whispered that she had been silenced permanently, her spirit left to wander the building, trapped in an endless loop of despair. Chapter 3. The Visitor. That night, as Emma lay in bed, she felt a chill creep into the room, colder than anything she'd ever felt. The voice returned, louder than ever, pleading, desperate, and then she saw it. In the dim glow from her phone's screen, a shadow began to form in the corner of her room, taking shape, shifting, growing. A figure slowly emerged from the darkness. A woman with long, tangled hair and hollow eyes, her face twisted in agony. Her clothes were tattered, covered in dark, blotchy stains, and her bony fingers reached out toward Emma, trembling with an eerie, unnatural grace. Emma's body was paralyzed with terror as she watched the woman inch closer, the air thick with the stench of decay. "Please, help me," the woman rasped, her voice low and broken, yet familiar. Emma recognized it as the voice that had been calling her. day after day, night after night. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused to move as if bound by invisible chains. The woman leaned in, her face inches from Emma's, and whispered, "They buried me here, below the floor. I am trapped, forgotten. I am lost." Emma's heart thundered as realization dawned upon her. She had been living above Lydia's final resting place all along, a grave covered up and paved over in the name of progress. Chapter 4. The Haunting. For days after the encounter, Emma couldn't shake the image of the woman from her mind. She felt a constant cold presence beside her, felt eyes watching her every move. The whispers grew louder, more frequent, and more intense. It wasn't long before she started seeing Lydia everywhere, reflected in mirrors, lurking in shadows, even staring back at her from the glassy surface of her coffee. Emma's life was consumed by Lydia's cries for help, her pleas for freedom. Finally, Emma could take no more. She reached out to an old friend who practiced paranormal investigations, hoping for some kind of closure. They set up a seance, candles flickering in the darkness, the air thick with incense. As they chanted, the room grew colder, the shadows darker, until Lydia's presence filled the room once more. But this time, it wasn't just Lydia. Dark shapes began to emerge from every corner, grotesque figures twisted and distorted, their faces gaunt and hollow, their eyes filled with anguish and fury. These were the forgotten souls, the ones who had been silenced, hidden away, buried in the walls of the hospital-turned apartment. They wailed, reaching out with bony hands, desperate for release. Emma and her friend barely escaped that night, but the building didn't. Later that week, it was condemned after unexplained structural damage left it in ruins. Emma moved far away, leaving the city and her memories behind, but Lydia's voice never truly faded. In the quiet hours of the night, Emma still hears it, a soft whisper, a desperate plea for help from the shadows that never truly die. And that, my friends, is the story of the Midnight Murmurs. Emma may have escaped the building, but Lydia's cries, they'll never truly fade. Stories like this remind us that even when we think we're alone, something from the past may still be lurking in the shadows, just waiting to reach out. Thank you for joining me tonight in the dark corners of the unknown. If you felt a chill down your spine, if you caught yourself looking over your shoulder, don't worry, you're not the only one. If you enjoyed this story and want more, make sure to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with someone who loves a good scare. Until next time, sleep with one eye open, and beware of the whispers that call to you in the night. Sweet dreams.